So welcome, everybody. Good morning. As you can imagine, at an NFT conference, the morning sessions are a little sparser, but that means that we can hopefully have a little bit more interactivity. Why don't we start off, how many of you were attending the conference last year? Oh, not many, okay. Well, we can think of, even though you weren't attending last year, we've all had a chance to see what's happened over the last year with the NFT. If you think of the Gartner hype cycle, we started off, like any other new innovation at the very low point. And then over the last year, we've seen sort of the height of the hype and the expectations. And now we're seeing sort of the downward trend. And I think probably the biggest takeaway is, A, we survived the hype cycle, and now it's time to build. And that's really what this panel is all about, is looking at the foundations, the layer one, and the ecosystems above it, and how you're going to build better and understand what we've learned over the past years doing that. Today, I'm joined by Grace Ng, and both of us have been building on different blockchains. We had other panelists that may or may not be joining us for this session. So my background, we'll go into the backgrounds, but I've built on Ethereum and Ethereum derivatives. Grace has built on Bitcoin. And other panelists who may or may not join us, and we can talk about some of the other environments, Solana and Federa, while they're not here. In either case, I'll let Grace go ahead and introduce yourself, and also what's unique about the Bitcoin environment that you've built on.
Sure. Hi, everyone. My name is Grace, and I'm the artist of Crash Punks, which is a 9K NFT collection that is built on Bitcoin. And most people don't know that you can have NFTs on Bitcoin. The thing is, I work with Stacks, which is, it enables smart contracts for Bitcoin. So Stacks is a layer one blockchain that anchors to Bitcoin, and it extends the security and decentralization of the Bitcoin network. And so what it does is, Stacks has this, it has a proof of transfer consensus mechanism, which makes it really unique because in the Stacks ecosystem, the priority is really about decentralization and security. And so that's kind of like at the forefront of everything. And I can dive deeper into kind of like what makes it unique.
Right. Why don't you take a moment and talk about what makes it unique? Because first thing, when I heard you're building on Bitcoin, that in itself is sort of unique from an NFT perspective. So maybe taking a minute and going a little deeper.
Sure. Yeah, actually, the first NFTs were actually minted on Bitcoin, the rare Pepes, back in like 2017. So it's totally possible. Stacks makes it a lot easier with the Stacks blockchain. Basically, what it does, so Stacks anchors to Bitcoin, and basically it uses this proof of transfer mechanism where if you have a Stacks token, you can stake it and then you earn Bitcoin, and the people who are mining Stacks, they're actually sending Bitcoin back in order to secure the Stacks blockchain. So instead of burning, so they're just recycling the Bitcoin. Instead of burning Bitcoin, they're just sending it back to the stakers, the stackers who are staking Stacks. So there's that, and then there's also the Clarity the Clarity programming language, which is what Stacks uses. They created their own programming language, which is non-Turing complete. It's a precise, predictable language that doesn't compile, and there are a lot of benefits to it. It's a Rust-based language, and there are a lot of benefits because when it doesn't compile, it's actually human readable, so it's less error prone. And so it's like what you wrote is what you see. It's human readable. And it's a lot safer, less hacker friendly. And then also with regards to all the transactions within the Stacks blockchain are actually verifiable on the Bitcoin blockchain. So that's how it's like super secure as well.
Excellent. So one of the things that Grace mentioned is it's not just the layer one. So how many of you have built NFTs or minted NFTs directly and created applications that are running directly on layer one, either using a language on top of the layer or Solidity if you're working in Ethereum. How long did it take you? Right? It takes a long time. When you're building directly onto the layer one, it's like building a house. You've got a foundation, but there's a lot going on between the foundation and the house above, right? You have a whole system of sort of the plumbing, the electrical, the framing, and all of that kind of work takes place in that layer above layer one.
Yeah.
And that frequently gets ignored in the process when people are thinking about how do you build your applications and how do you build on top of layer one. So actually one of the first things we wanted to say in this working session is it's less about the layer. That's probably one thing we've learned over the past, since 2017, building on blockchains and fostering NFT projects, is layer one is just the first foundational layer. There's a lot more happening on top of that to be able to make it fast, efficient, and interoperable. So we've worked, our origin story, Lori Fena, I'm from Personal Digital Spaces, and we've created a layer X, which is sort of a cross layer that's above layer one and layer two, and it makes it easy to do things like establish ownership, establish use rights, figure out what the value exchange is going to be in a programmatic way, so you can address it via REST APIs in a regular programming language like Rust or JavaScript or whatever programming language you're using to create an application, and you need to move around digital assets like NFTs to trade them or move them around. The other thing that we've learned over the past 5 years in creating applications on top of Ethereum-based systems. We originally started on Ethereum. It got to be too slow and too expensive when people were starting to use it for crypto. We then moved over to Quorum. How many of you have heard about Quorum? So the JP Morgan organization, and that worked better. But we then realized that that too was not quite meeting our criteria with respect to performance. So we forked that, and we have something called proof of loyalty. And it follows that anybody that's wanting to transact on the system with their applications obviously don't want to create launch things that are going to create the system or create blocks that are bad, because they're relying on that distributed ledger as well. And it's like a frequent flyer program. The more points you have, the more vote you have on what the routes are. And so that system worked extremely well. But when you've moved your layer of programmatic layer and APIs across multiple versions of the blockchain, you start to extract and realize that really all blockchains are that distributed ledger. So we've created a system of interoperability, because the other thing that we've seen over time is that the user experience, users don't really want to figure out what blockchain their assets are on and have specialized wallets and specialized systems, and their little assets may or may not be worth anything if they move out of an environment. So we've started to talk a lot more about interoperability and amongst projects and user experiences.
Yeah.
You want to talk about that a little?
Sure. Yeah, I actually like the analogy of like building the houses on the foundation. So with stacks and Bitcoin, you might be thinking, because it prioritizes decentralization and security, you might be thinking, oh, maybe it's like slower, or how does it scale? And so it's all like layers stacked on top of each other. And so at the foundation, it's Bitcoin. So all the transactions settle into Bitcoin, and it can read and write to Bitcoin. And then there's the stacks layer, and then there's hyperchains that are being built on stacks. So that enables, you can think of those like highways that are being built on top of stacks, on top of Bitcoin. And so these highways enable a lot of really fast transactions, very low latency, and you can do a lot of like big NFT drops. My collection is one of the largest NFT collections on the in the Stacks ecosystem. You can do a lot of large NFT collections. You can have a lot of fast transactions without really worrying about getting, slowing down. And then also with the Clarity programming language, because it's decidable and very precise, it actually, you don't have to estimate gas fees. It's all known up front. And so that's all very transparent. The contract is very transparent and human readable. So the way it would work is you can do your fast transactions on the hyperchains, and then if you need to move it to something that's more secure and stable, then you could just like move it to Stacks, which is actually, all settled down to Bitcoin. So that's how it manages and prioritizes this decentralization in addition to the throughput. And then there's also, the hyperchains are also open source, so anyone can modify and build on top of that too. And so people are talking about building EVM compatible hyperchains. There's also like a bridge between Ethereum over to Stacks. So there's a NFT collection that called Satoshiables. They migrated from Ethereum over to Stacks and onto Bitcoin. And so there's a lot of interoperability as well.
Excellent. So Grace pointed out some really important things. So as you're looking at fostering NFT communities or any kind of, as we're in this conference and we're realizing from the speaker before us, is it's not just what we traditionally think of NFTs, but really moving around digital assets that may contain all different kinds of information and using the same kind of the promise of NFT, but actually creating systems that make tokenizing the rights to use information and assets and make it decentralized rather than centralized systems for trading that reduce the friction. So as we're looking at expanding the use of NFTs beyond sort of the early adopters that we've seen over the past 12 months and the rise of the early adopters, but really the hype cycle moving on to the rest of the marketplace. What is going to bring on enterprises, brands, and all of the people that are not the 15% who already have digital wallets, but the rest of the marketplace, the 85% of the people that don't currently have digital wallets, and how are we going to build systems that enable the transactions and assets and sharing of information that can happen using the distributed ledger and more of a decentralized system. So some of the, we originally started out sharing information pieces that were in the healthcare space. So we were writing applications in 2016 before the NFTs and sharing information on the digital ledger for patient records. And so you could move patient records around and it would be controlled by the patient. And they'd have access to everything that they did at any different clinic, and it was stored at the clinic, so you didn't have to move the information. It remained there, but the person had a license to it to be able to view it and share it, and they were in control of it. And that worked out really well. But when selling into a hospital system or any large organization where they own the digital assets and they control them in their database, there's some really basic things that when you're working with larger organizations, they want to, number one, no CTO is going to, or CIO is going to let you move their information into your system. So you need a system to interface to theirs, the real world interface to the virtual world interface of licensing and blockchain. So number one, that's a huge criteria that NFTs are going to need to cross to make it into the 85% world. Two, no CFO wants to hold Bitcoin or Ethereum or tokens on their balance sheet. It's unless you're Michael Saylor, right? And that's another big question. So how do you create systems that don't always require enterprises to be in that that banking process until they're ready. So we've created a utility token that's very similar to what they're used to using for enterprise software, which is sort of paying ahead for use tokens and using it to run their system. Just some of the considerations as we're building out enterprise projects and bringing in larger brands. How do you make sure that a brand can control their user base? They don't necessarily want to send, what chief marketing officer wants to spend so much money in acquiring customers and then send them over to somebody else's marketplace, right? To monetize their users. So what we've been finding is for the NFT world to move from the early adopters of that 15% who have wallets and the people that are, minting new types of assets to bring on the rest of the brands, the rest of the people that want to exchange information, rapidly. What we found is addressing some of these really core and basic needs within corporations. From the user experience, how many of you have had to go through the process of having multiple wallets, one for your transaction system, at Coinbase or whatever, and then you've got your MetaMask wallet that you've got to move coins into to be able to buy an NFT. That kind of multi-step user experience is something that is also hindering NFTs. And we need to work not just on interoperability amongst the chains, but the user experience and what interoperability looks like from a user's perspective. So I'll turn some of this over to Grace because I know she's been thinking about this as well.
Yeah, so a lot of, so like I said, Stacks has a really cool, unique feature, which is this proof of transfer, where you stake your Stacks token and you can earn Bitcoin, and that opens up the opportunity for a lot of new business models within the creative economy, within like nonprofit organizations, and also expanding to get more people onboarded into the ecosystem. So some of the projects are, so for example, within the creator economy, you can have projects where you can stake your NFT and then earn Bitcoin. There's a writers platform called Cycle where in order to support the writers, you can stake your Stacks tokens and then the Bitcoin yield, it's 10% Bitcoin yield, and that can go to the writers to support their work. And so that's an example of how that can expand to musicians and all types of creators. And then that can also transfer over to the nonprofit and also expanding to onboarding other people as well. So some of the initiatives are, one is a fundraiser for Afghani women, and what people were able to do was they staked their Stacks token, and collectively the 10% Bitcoin yield, it was donated to a nonprofit organization. And so these are some examples of how the technology can help fundraisers as well as help onboard other people who are not familiar with crypto into the ecosystem as well.
Excellent. That actually it brings up an important point, which is the purpose and what are some of the technical features and functionalities that help propel community. Because one of the reasons that, if you really think about it, the killer app has always been sharing information, right? Whether it comes down to printing presses, spreadsheets, social media, you name it. The most important and sort of killer app that drives adoption is sharing information. We can share information to solve big problems. In the situation with global pandemics, if we had real-time access from community source, not just governmental sources, we'd probably be able to have better radar and sonar systems for understanding how the pandemic is moving through organizations, and creating systems that are friction-free, that enable people to share information better. One of the biggest issues that I think we can address within building NFT systems and building systems on top of blockchain's immutable records is to address issues around trust. The ability to know, not just through a centralized source, but a decentralized source, who owns this piece of information or this bit of intellectual property, right? That is an essential part of building trust. I headed up the Electronic Frontier Foundation and trustee.org in the early days of the internet. And the most important thing that was preventing people from adopting in commerce was trust. So being able to know that responsibly, I know that I own this information. And the other thing is controlling the use. What can be done with this information, right? So technical components that establish ownership, establish what can be done in the decentralized world, in the virtual world with that information, because we've all seen information going out into the world, but no systems to control it. It can be used in ways that we don't want, both issues around privacy, if it's personal information, or issues around, for creators, their information being monetized and used without any compensation. So this is a system that can actually engender trust by creating real systems for establishing ownership, establishing how things can be used in a programmatic way, built into applications and monitored and transacted online. And then the third thing, which is how do you create business models and business systems that you can attach directly to that intellectual property or that information, right? That's sort of the three things that as a society we're going to need to do to build trustable systems that allow us to share information, make sure that the owners of the information have knowledge and everybody understands who owns this, what can be done with it, and what the value exchange is on all points. And that's really, I guess, one of the fundamental things that we wanted to build in our layer X, which is those key functionalities. You don't have to write smart contracts. You can just call it via APIs, and it can work across blockchains. And so those are the things we're concentrating on, and we think that to create a more sustainable approach that everybody can thrive, that's really where we need to go on building NFT projects.
I actually want to bring up something about community as well. So there's another project within Stacks called City Coins, and that was launched in Miami, New York City. So basically, the mayor of Miami created City Coins. It's a way for people to collectively pool money together for a city that they believe in, and they were able to raise millions of dollars. I think it was like $50 million, and they don't have to collect taxpayers' monies anymore. And they were able to use some of these proceeds to help for housing and help other city initiatives. And so City Coins is a really cool project you can look into if you want to learn how to build community on the blockchain without the trust. And then there's also other technologies being built on it, like Wi-Fi networks and a lot of decentralized 911 calling projects. Yeah.
Excellent. So I'm just looking at the time, and I realize that our panel time is over, but I'd really want to encourage everybody here to focus on what can we do to build. Now, even though the hype cycle says we're at a low point, this is a perfect time to reassess where we are and to build real programs that bring the rest of the 80% and 85% of the world onto sort of the trusted, decentralized communities that I think all of us are building. So on that note, let's go build. Thank you.
Thank you.